Persona 5 is loved worldwide, but making it was honestly kind of hell for Atlus. They had to deal with earthquakes, bankruptcy, hardware switching, and a basically 6-year development cycle. A lot happened in 2011 that would shape the entire development of Persona 5. At this point, Persona 5 was still years and years away from release, but the problems that would define its development were already beginning to appear. Before Persona 5, the Persona series had mostly been built around older hardware. Persona 3 and Persona 4 were both PlayStation 2 games, meaning Atlus had spent years mastering development within the limitations of those systems. But Persona 5 was going to be different. It wasn't just going to be another Persona game. Persona has seen a good amount of success with the last two titles, so Atlus wanted this one to be bigger and more stylish, more cinematic than anything they created before. To actually achieve that vision, they first had to figure out how to make a game like that. And that is where Catherine comes in. In February of 2011, Atlus released Catherine, a game that wasn't made as part of the Persona series, but it's created by the same internal team at Atlus that had made the Persona games. Catherine was important because it was Atlus's first major attempt at creating a full HD game. The jump from the PlayStation 2 era to the HD one wasn't a simple upgrade. Higher resolution models, more detailed environments, and more complex visuals all required a completely different approach to development. You can see the difference when you compare Persona 4 and Persona 5 side by side. Persona 4 has a more simple, more chibi-inspired visual style, while Persona 5 embraced a much more expressive anime aesthetic. The characters look sharper, the animations were more detailed, and the entire game has a much stronger sense of style, of course due to its time. Catherine helped Atlus understand what was possible in HD, but it also showed the challenges of moving into a new generation. Catherine was developed using the Gamebryo engine, a third-party engine that helped Atlus transition into HD development. However, this engine isn't what Atlus wanted, and while it worked for Catherine, I don't think it would have worked for a 100-hour game like Persona 5. Because of this, Atlus decided to create their own internal engine for Persona 5. This decision gave the developers more freedom to achieve their vision, but it also meant they had to spend valuable time creating the tools they needed to build the game itself. Catherine is honestly a brilliant game, so you actually should go and play it. However, just 1 month after Catherine released, another event would completely shock the world. On March 11th, 2011, a devastating earthquake and tsunami struck in Japan, resulting in thousands of deaths and causing widespread destruction across the country. This of course is a tragic event, and this affected the team at Atlus, as they felt their original concept didn't really fit anymore. The original concept for the game was very different from the final version we get. Early ideas focused on a more adventurous journey, with the protagonist travelling around and experiencing different places. However, after the events of 2011, the team felt that this idea no longer fit the atmosphere of Japan at the time. Instead of focusing on escaping and discovering the outside world, Persona 5 shifted toward a story about confronting problems within society itself. That change would eventually become the foundation of the final game, a group of young people rebelling against a system they believe is corrupt and unfair. By the end of 2011, Persona 5 had already gone through major changes. The team had a new direction for the story, they were adapting to a new era of game development, and they were building new technology to make their vision possible. But these changes created another problem. The longer Persona 5 took to develop, the bigger the game was becoming, and as Atlus continued to work on it, the project just kept becoming far more ambitious than anyone originally expected. So going back in time a little to 2006, 55% of Atlus were bought by a company named Index Corporation, and in 2010, Index Corporation fully absorbed Atlus, meaning they no longer existed as an individual company, they became a division inside Index. Fast forward to 2013, Index Corporation were under investigation for fraud and other such crimes, and the Japanese Securities and Exchange Surveillance Commission launched a surprise raid on Index Corporation's Tokyo headquarters. At the end of June, stuck in 24.5 billion yen debt, the company filed for bankruptcy. This situation created uncertainty around Atlus's future at the time, when Persona 5 was still deep in development, as everything was kind of in a bit of a limbo state, and it wasn't clear what was going to happen. The creative director of Persona 3 onwards, Katsura Hashino, made an announcement at this time. Quote, "I'm sorry for the concerns caused by the recent circumstances, and I apologise. Next year is set to bring many announcements as part of the 25th anniversary of the Atlus brand, but there are a few things I'd like to share before that. All the unannounced titles we are working on are under zealous development. The challenge for the time being is how good they will be. We have spent days full of problems and worries, but we work strenuously so that we don't break our focus. As long as we continue to think about you that love our games, about the creativity, the know-how accumulated, the challenges and expectation of results, I believe that the future of the series will be something great, full of fun and stimulating, end quote. A while later, a bidding war broke out, with Sega's Sammy Holdings eventually buying Index Corporation for $140 million US. A few months later, in November of 2013, Persona 5 was officially announced to the public, with a release date set for 2014. However, if you've played the game, you'll know this did not happen, and fans would have to end up waiting another 2 years beyond that, and those 2 years would bring even more problems. Going into 2014, another challenge appeared. The PlayStation 4 had arrived. When Persona 5 was first announced in 2013, it was a PlayStation 3 exclusive, and at the time this made perfect sense. The PS3 still had a huge fan base in Japan, and Atlus had already spent years developing games for this older hardware. But as development continued, the gaming industry moved on. See, the PlayStation 4 wasn't just a more powerful console, it had completely different hardware. The PS3 used Sony's notoriously complex cell processor, which, if you play Metal Gear, it's a big reason why Metal Gear Solid 4 was never ported. However, the PS4 adopted a much more PC-like x86 architecture. This meant that Persona 5 couldn't simply be copied across to the new console. Atlus had to adapt both their engine and the game itself to work on two very different systems, pretty much meaning they were building two games simultaneously. In an interview, Hashino states that the 2D elements of the game had to be completely redrawn from the PlayStation 3 originals in order to even work on the PS4. Instead of shipping the PlayStation 3 version they had originally planned, Persona 5 became a cross-generation release. You see, the PS3 version remained important for the Japanese market, however the PS4 version did two important things. Firstly, it ensured the game wouldn't be stuck on the old generation forever. You see, in the worldwide market, a lot of countries have moved on to the PS4, so it remained important for worldwide sales that it gets a cross-generation release. It was another example of development taking so long that the original plan no longer made much sense to go by, and by this point, Persona 5 had been delayed to 2015. And then 2015 came around and the game didn't come out. Hashino said in an interview that the game was nearly done by that point, but they still needed to fine-tune some gameplay elements and such things because they wanted to deliver a great final product. And honestly, that's respectable, and it's probably a big reason why Atlus is quite a loved company in the modern day, because they clearly do care about their games. Another reason I believe that the game could have been delayed is, in 2013, when Persona 5 was announced, a few Persona 4 spin-offs was announced alongside it. One of them being Persona 4 Dancing All Night. However, by 2014, Atlus were not happy with the quality of the game. You see, they had outsourced the development to a team called Dingo, who made the Miku rhythm games, but Atlus didn't think they were doing a good enough job, so they removed them and took over from production. This meant that big people on the development had to be spread across games to ensure that every game would actually get a release date at some point. So this, combined with the fact that they still needed to tune some things to make sure the final product was going to be as great as it could be, led to the delay of 2016 release. Which I think is honestly okay. The game got delayed multiple times, but the final product is so brilliant, and I'd rather have a game that was delayed and cared for than a game that was rushed out, like Cyberpunk for example. If there's one thing that I've learned along the way with this video, it's that Atlus simply underestimated the scale of what they were creating. Persona 5 wasn't just another sequel for them, it was the series' first true mainline HD entry. It had handcrafted palaces, it had dozens of hours of fully voiced story scenes, it pretty much had a new visual identity compared to the older games, and it had over 100 hours of content in a single playthrough. It's honestly no surprise that the game kept getting delayed, and Hashino says it best himself. He quotes, "There's a lot packed into the game. I almost wasn't sure if we'd be able to compact it all down and fit it into one game." And after 5 to 6 years of development, a devastating earthquake, the collapse of Atlus's parent company, delays, new engines, Persona 5 finally launched in Japan on September 15th, 2016, with a worldwide release following the next year in 2017. And despite everything that happened behind the scenes, it was worth the wait, as I know, and I'm sure every person that played the game watching this video also knows. Persona 5 became the fastest selling game in the franchise, and it received widespread critical acclaim across the entire world, and it's gone on to sell well over 10 million copies across Persona 5, Persona 5 Royal, and all its various ports and spin-offs, and it's transformed the series into a mega house in the modern day. And it's allowed for Persona 3 to get a remake, Persona 4 to get a remake, and of course, Persona 6 was recently announced, and the expectations are high, and I think it's going to be brilliant.